Okay, so I would like to now introduce our guest speaker, Coral Harkies from the Ontario Genealogical Society. Thank you so much for being here, Coral.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great that we get a chance to do more. We need to do more of these kinds of presentations to people. I think it's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to turn my camera off. I just wanted you all to see that I was a real person, but we don't want to look at my face move all through this session. So I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. So this is what we're going to be covering today, starting our family history and using the Ancestry Library Edition. I'm going to be focusing on researching using the Ancestry Library Edition as well as a few other things. So this is kind of what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk a little bit about who the Ontario Genealogical Society is. We're going to do a little bit of introduction into your family history journey. We're going to look at a few other resources that might be helpful for you as you get started. And then we're going to jump right into using the Ancestry Library Edition. We're going to start with you and what you think you know. I say what you think you know because people don't always tell the whole truth on things. Sometimes people leave out painful memories. Sometimes people change their age to get into the military, to get into something or to get out of something. Sometimes people, get disconnected from their family, so it's easier to just pretend that there isn't any. The one story that I have is a friend of mine was doing some research, and on a marriage record, it said that the groom's parents had passed away. So she was avidly looking for a death registration for these two people, and it discovered that they had died much later. And when doing some reading and some interviewing of some family members, she realized that he was no longer speaking to his parents. So they were dead to him, but they weren't actually passed away. So the information that he wrote on the marriage license was not exactly accurate.
So when you're looking at records, you also have to keep in mind that spelling and names are not consistent. So just because the person, we spell it a certain way, doesn't mean that when a census taker or somebody at a registrar's office was spelling it, they spelt it the same way. The further back you go, people were less and less literate, and spelling did not have the same necessity of exactness that it has today. You also want to keep track of where you're searching and what you're searching. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at the Ancestry Library Edition. Things get updated, things get changed, new things come in. So you want to make sure you know when you last searched in a repository, whether it's a physical place or online, because you may find that something has been added or updated since. So it's very important that you track where and when you looked and found things. You're going to need to create some sort of source citation. So those of you that went to school and did bibliographies, that's what we're talking about. And when you're dealing with the Ancestry Library Edition, they do have some of that information already there for you, so you don't need to figure it all out totally. And I'll show you where you can find that when we get there. You want to have a plan when you're researching. You want to sort of know, I'm looking for the marriage record of these two people. Otherwise, what happens is when you get searching, you start following all the other interesting things that you find, and then you never get done what you set out to do, but now you're all over the place. So if you have a plan, it keeps you focused, it keeps you on track, allows you not to get distracted. If you do find one of those really cool things, make a note, finish what you were looking for, and then go back to that other thing that you found that you wanted to explore. You're going to work backwards from yourself step by step. Don't assume that just because someone has the same name and lived in and around the same place around the same time that it's your person. A lot of people with common names, and you can get easily mixed up and start following the wrong line. You're going to want to verify, confirm, and evaluate all the information that you find to make sure that you haven't missed anything, that you haven't misinterpreted anything. You want to contact the local people. So you want to contact the local Genealogical Society, Historical Society, Museum and Archive to get information about that particular place. I was doing some research for a friend of mine and discovered that his family lived in Goldfield, Nevada at the turn of the century. And I found out that they actually owned a store in Nevada, in Goldfield, Nevada. It was a mining town. And within 5 years, the town was bust. There was a strike and a flood. And the town basically went from boom to bust in about 5 years. I contacted the local historical society and the local museum there, and they sent me 32 pages of documents, pictures, and information about the history of the town, and some documents on the family that I was searching for. And sometimes there's a small fee. For the Nevada people, it cost me $25. I've also asked questions in Nova Scotia and was sent a whole set of newspaper articles about the chief of police who was a descendant of somebody I was helping, and that they didn't charge me anything. I would not have got any of those pieces of information had I not asked the local people and get information from them. They are going to know far more about all of that stuff than the internet is ever going to tell you. You also want to take advantage of educational opportunities, conferences, webinars, YouTube videos, in-person events to learn more about how to do research, your methodology, more about different types of records, more about areas where you might now find your family that you didn't know they lived before. Some of the types of records that you're going to come across when you're researching is vital records, such as your birth, marriage, and death registrations, estate records, probate, which includes wills and guardianships, census records, which can be national census, which we just did a Canadian census just recently, as well as state and local census records. Church and religious records could include disciplinary action, could include membership lists, could include ordinations, first communions, any of those other religious rites that different religions have. Directories, there's city directories, there's organizational directories, occupational directories, school records, that could be yearbooks, attendance records, school minute meetings, construction of schools, that sort of thing. Funeral and burial records, that would be cemeteries, funeral homes. With funeral homes, do keep in mind that they are a private business, so they are not required to share information with you. And you also want to keep in mind time frames. So the more recent the information, the less likely they are going to share it with you unless you're next of kin. Military records, that includes service records as well as pensions, especially in the American Civil War. There's a huge collection of pension records of people who asked to be helped once the war was over. Immigration records, both passenger lists, they were passenger lists made when they left, and there were passenger lists made when they arrived. So you'll find them on both sides of the water. Naturalization records when they became citizens. If you came from the UK or other Commonwealth countries to Canada, you did not necessarily need to become naturalized because you were already a British subject. So naturalization wasn't required. But if you did come from the US, then naturalization to become a citizen would have been required. Occupational records, so there's membership lists, there's company magazines, there's pension records, again, for businesses. Some businesses have actually business archives, so you can find out a little bit about the company, what it did, when it ran, that sort of thing. Lands and land records, so you have deeds and crown grants, mortgages and sales. Crown and legal records, so you got criminal records, divorce records, anything to do with the court. In terms of personal records, people have letters and diaries, photographs. Tax records, there's property tax, there's personal tax. You don't get a lot of information on personal tax in Ontario and Canada, but certainly property tax and assessment records are available. Local histories, which are really important to understand the time period and the place that your ancestors lived. Your ancestors did not live in isolation. If something was going on in the community, they were likely involved or affected by that event. Newspapers are awesome. You get great things of information, both not just death notices, but advertisements. If your family owned a store or a business in the community, they may have advertised in the classified ads of the newspaper. You'll also get, a lot of times they used to list who was promoted from grade 1 to grade 2, who joined the Boy Scouts or the Girl Guides. All of that kind of stuff can be in small local newspapers. Institutions also kept records, organizations, hospitals, orphan agencies. I got this list, this is just a summary, from the FamilySearch.org wiki, which the website is at the bottom of the slide. We'll be talking a little bit more about family search in a minute, but that's where you can get a checklist of all the different kinds of records that you can search for. So some of the other sites that you want to look at when you're doing research, and I'll go through them and then I'll show you the actual websites. So Library and Archives Canada is going to have records that were created by the federal government. So you're looking at census records, immigration, military, some land records. The records are going to be kept by the level of government or the organization that created them. So if it's a federal jurisdiction, then it's going to be at Library and Archives Canada. If it's an Ontario level record, it's going to be at the Archives of Ontario. The Archives of Ontario, Library and Archives Canada has a lot of actual databases and firsthand documents that you can read and look at. Archives of Ontario does not have as much. They have licensed their documents out to Family Search and to Ancestry. So they don't have a lot of firsthand documents there, but they have a lot of really great pathfinders and research guides that can be very, very helpful in furthering your research. They also have a great staff, and if you get to go into the archives, they have an awesome reading room that you can use, and they're in Toronto at York University. Family Search is the website for the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They collect records and digitize records from all across the world. That site is free. You just have to create a free online account and you can search and get records there. And we'll look at that website in a minute. The Ontario Genealogical Society, which is where I work, was founded in 1961 and it's celebrating 60 years in existence this year. It's our 60th anniversary. And we have 30 geographic branches across the province. It doesn't cover the entire province. And we also have 5 special interest groups that is not related to Ontario specifically, but things that are connected to Ontario. We're all volunteer driven. We have a small staff of 3 people. And our mandate is really to educate, advocate, and preserve documents for family historians in Ontario. And I'll show that website too. The last 2 are places to look for headstones and grave markers. Canadian Headstones is all Canadian. It's a growing site. And Find a Grave is owned by Ancestry and is much more international. Both of them are crowdsourced sites. So people like you and I that take pictures of stones can upload them to the site and then they're there for other people to check out. So I'm going to show you some of these sites quickly now. So this is the Library and Archives Canada website. And if you scroll down, there's a whole section on genealogy and family history. There's also ones on census records, military, all that kind of stuff. So that's where you're going to go to look for things created by the federal government. The Archives of Ontario's website has a family history section. They have some online exhibits, which can be really interesting. So if you go to the Family History Center and go to the records, this is where you'll find all of their great pathfinders and research guides that can help you as you're searching through records. The Ontario Genealogical Society's website also has some information. We have a search index called TONY, which stands for the Ontario Name Index. And you can search here for records. Again, it's not going to get you the original record. It's an index of where you can find other things. We do have a weekly newsletter that comes out every Saturday morning. You do not have to be a member to subscribe. And you can do that by scrolling all the way down to the bottom and filling out the subscribe button at the bottom. We're also on Facebook and Twitter for those of you that are into social media. You can also join us, obviously. The cost is $63 for the main site. And then the branches and SIGs range from $5 to $15. And there is all of our branches and SIGs, all 34 of them, I think is my total number. Family Search. So this, once you've created your free login, this is the Mormon Church site. You can search here. You can also use the map to narrow down your search. So if you only wanted to look at what was in Canada, you can click on the map on Canada, choose Ontario, and now you'll only be searching in things in Ontario. So you won't get Mary Smith who lived in Australia or South Africa or anywhere else in the world. I do want to draw your attention to the Family Search Wiki. This is their encyclopedia for research. You can search any place. I'll put in, one of the ladies that works in my office is from Malaysia. So I'm just going to put in Malaysia and it'll give you ideas on record sets and things to do and learning about the geography, the history, the structure of records in Malaysia. These are written by volunteers and are updated as new information becomes available and they get a chance to update them. So there's also videos on here and all kinds of stuff. So it's certainly worth having a look. Canadian Headstones is a place to search for headstone records. So you would search for you can search the last name. I'll just use mine because there's not very many. See if I get anything. And it did not find anything. That just means nobody, oh, it did find some. There you go. So then you can see the actual tombstone. It'll tell you what cemetery it's in, and you can click on it and have a look at the actual stone. Find a grave is very similar. It's just more globally based. So you would do the same thing, and you can find, I found the tombstone for an ancestor who died in the First World War and is buried in Belgium. I found a picture of his stone using Find a Grave. So that's an overview of the sort of basic sites that you may want to look at when you're starting to research. Now we're going to go right into the Ancestry Library Edition. So when you log into the Library Edition, this is the first page you're going to see. It's got a few things on here. It's got a searching box. It's got how to get documents sent to your house. I have not used that feature, so I'm not sure how it works, but there seems to be a video and all that to show you how that works. Then you have your category boxes. So it's got census, vital records, military, and immigration. So those are the 4 main categories of records that they have. You scroll down a little bit, you've got some quick links to some other common record sets. So if you wanted to just search in a particular record set, then you could certainly narrow it down there. I'm going to go back up and we're going to start with begin searching. So I'm going to click on the begin searching. And this is the screen that you get. So you could in here search for a person's name, where they lived. You always want to try and get a place name in, especially if you have a common name. The place name will help narrow down and help Ancestry figure out what suggestions to give you that are more likely to be accurate. If you have more information, you can click on this more options and you can add in a father, a mother, a sibling, a spouse, a birth, a death. And as you click on each one, it'll add. So if I click on death, it adds a death date. If I click on mother, it adds a place for the mother. When you're searching, search broad first and then narrow, or search narrow and then broad. You can do it either way, but you might be surprised the results will change depending on what information you put in, because sometimes, again, if you put in the mother's name as Alice, but she's always known as Allie, or or something like that, and the record is sorted under Allie, then it may not pull it up if you put in Alice. So sometimes you leave things out, add things in, play around with the search functions, and hopefully that'll give you some better results. Before we look at searching, I want to look at the card catalog. So if you click on the card catalog, this is very similar to what would have been when I was in school in the library. You pulled out the drawer and had all those little index cards with everything on it. That's what this card catalog is. So this is every database that Ancestry Library Edition has available for you to search. When you do the main search on the main search page, I'm just going to go back for a second. On the main search page, it's only Ancestry is going to pull from the record sets that are used most often, from the more common record sets. It's not necessarily going to pull from those smaller collections that may be really interesting and cool and have stuff on your family. So that's why the card catalog can be really helpful. So I'm going to use the keyword because I don't know what the title of the record is. So I'm just going to put in Ontario. And I'm going to click search. So here's all the record sets that have Ontario in its description, in its name, in its entity. So you'll see that there's some really interesting smaller record sets that are not going to get pulled up when you do a general search. So for instance, the Canadian Fenian Raids bounty application. So that was the Fenian Raids were a war-ish, a rebellion of people who thought they could make Canada part of the United States, and there were some raids and things in the middle 1800s, and these are their bounty records. What's some of the other smaller ones here? You know, certificates of military instruction. I don't even know what that is. Let me scroll on it and see what it says. So this is a collection of certificates of grants of military schools of instruction. So if one of your relatives went to one of these schools, there might be some certificates or something with their name on it, or some records that they attended that particular institution. So the one that we're going to look at is this Niagara Falls, Ontario honeymoon and visitor registration. So a lot of people honeymooned in Niagara Falls, including my parents. And I'm just going to put in the name Smith. And I'm going to search. And here's all the people with Smith that registered in Niagara Falls between 1949 and 2011. If you want to see the image, you're going to click on this little icon over here, view image. And here is the actual page with the actual handwriting of the people who signed that register and when they signed it. So it's kind of cool to get the original handwriting. You might get an address. In this case, they've actually listed an address, so that might lead you to more records. Okay. So I was talking about that source information. Here is where in that record set you'll find the sourcing information. You would then add to your source the name that you searched for, maybe the page number that was on, the date that it was recorded. You could add to your source project, but that is part of the information. And here's an actual summary of what that information includes, why it was created, when it was created. So those are great way to understand if the record set includes what you're looking for. Ancestry also gives you some other related record collection sets that if you found something here, you might find something over there. So the honeymoon connects to the marriage record as well as to some border crossing records. So we're going to go back to the search. So here's our search page again, and we're going to do some searching. With Ancestry and with many of the other searching, many of the other databases, you can use what's called wildcards to search. So if you're not sure how someone spelt a name, the name I'm going to use is Henry. It could have been written down as Henry. It could have been written down as H-E-R-N-Y because they couldn't read how it was written. So we're going to look at Rebecca Henry. If I could type, it would be good. Now, if you weren't sure whether it was Henry or Henry, you can put in a wildcard. So I can take out the R and I can put it in asterisk. An asterisk will give you 0 to 5 characters. That'll replace. If you only want to try and replace one character, you would use a question mark. But we're going to put in that. And I know that she lived in Dufferin County. So I'm going to put in Dufferin County in the place name, and it does give you some options. So I'm going to choose that this is Dufferin. And I don't know when she was born, so I'm going to leave that part out for now. And I'm going to click search. So I'm not putting in a ton of information. And now you get the suggestions. Remember that these are suggestions. Doesn't mean this is the Rebecca Henry you're looking for, because many of these are not the Rebecca Henry I'm looking for. But you'll see I've got Henry, I've got Hendry, I've got, scroll down a little bit more, I got Henry, further down, Henny. So it does give you some other spelling variations. Ancestry will do that intrinsically, but if you put in the wildcard, it'll help it along. So we're going to look at this find a grave record, because I know this is the right person. So here is Rebecca Henry. Here is the information that Find a Grave has. Here's a link to the Find a Grave site if you wanted to go and check out the image of the photo. Remember that this is a crowdsourced site. So this information was put in by another researcher. So the information may or may not be accurate. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at things. The other thing Ancestry will do is it will give you suggested records. So if this is your Rebecca Henry, over here will give you a list of suggested records. So we're going to look at this death and we're going to see if it's the right person. So I'm going to click on the death. And again, it gives you a summary of the information, but we're going to view the actual document. Whenever you're doing research, always try and view the actual document. People index things wrong. People leave information out. You'll see that, I'm just going to go back for a minute. You'll see that the information that they give up really only has her age, her date of birth as an approximate year, where she died and what she died of. The actual record has a lot more information than that. So we're going to pull up the actual record, and we're just going to make this a little bit bigger so we can read it. So Rebecca is the very first one on this page. So if you go right up to the top, you'll notice it's Peel County in the division of Caledon. So it gives you where she died, gives you her name, gives you her gender and her race, gives you a date of death and a date of birth. The item, when they gave you, the Ancestry gave you the summary, it didn't give you the actual date. Gives you the lot and concession where she lives. So it gives you some hints to some land records. It tells you she was a widow, so it tells you that her husband died prior to her. It gives you parents' names. That wasn't on the summary that you saw when you looked at the initial page. Scrolling down, this gives you some information about when she lived places, when the doctor saw her last, what her cause of death was, how long the ailment lasted her, the doctor involved. So this gives you a lot more information than that summary. What you do have to keep in mind, especially on death records, is who is the informant. Obviously, Rebecca Henry did not give her parents' names on this document, somebody else did. This one does not show the informant. Some of the other later ones does have the informant listed on it. So the more closer to her the informant is, the more likely the information is to be correct, but you do have to go through and make sure that you've verified all that information. I'm going to look at one more. I'm going to look at this marriage. So this one says Rebecca Duce, D-U-C-E. Again, this is what I'm talking about with spelling and indexing. So again, you get a little bit of information here. You get her name, you get her spouse, and you get the name of the child. What this record is really the marriage of Robert Henry. It's not the marriage of Rebecca Duce. So here's Robert Henry and his wife, Minnie Cook, where they were born, occupation, and the parents. So it gives you Minnie's parents as well as Robert's parents. And you'll see here how they got the Deuce. Robert Henry, the Y from Henry, has scooped down into the K for Duke. Rebecca Duke was her maiden name. So you see how when someone who wasn't familiar with the family looked at that and saw D-U-C-E. So you got to watch when you're looking at indexes for those kinds of things. You can also get records that are not related to her at all. So watch very carefully that it is the person that you're looking at before you grab that information. I'm going to do another search for someone else. Back here. And I'll give you an example of things where people may not always be where you think they should be. Robert Vincent is my grandfather. He was born in Cohoes, New York, moved to Verdun outside Montreal. So we're going to search for him. So here's Robert Henry. Now I know that this is him as he lived in Cohoes, but I'm looking for a specific record. So we're going to look at this US World War II draft card for young men. We're going to click on it. And again, you get a summary of the information. But then we're going to click on the actual record. So during World War II, my grandfather was not a Canadian citizen. So by law, he had to register with the draft office in the United States. Even though he was 40 and probably not going to war, he still had to register. So although he was living in Verdun, Quebec, this record is actually created by the US government because that was his citizenship. So it gives you his address where he was living in Verdun, his age, his birth date and place, gives you where he was working in Montreal, which could lead you to some employment records if anything exists anymore. And it also gives you something interesting, the name and address of a person who will always know your address. So this will be another family member likely or a friend. In this case, it's his first cousin, Stephen Bell, who I knew, and I'm still close with his daughter today. So that is something to, watch for those other people that are listed on the records. The other thing to watch for is clicking on this next bar. Sometimes you think, oh, this is the end, there's nothing else. If I click next, this card had a backside, and there's information on the back about Robert. So it tells me his race is white, he's 5'6", he's 140 pounds, he has brown hair, and he's a medium build. And he registered, this registration was processed the 25th of April, 1944. Now, I didn't really know my grandfather, who died when I was quite young. So this information would be very interesting if it was someone that you weren't that familiar with. Okay. So I'm just going to sort of scroll down. Again, just watch that they are not like this. Robert L. Vincent is not going to be the same person. That middle initial is important. Talk a little bit about actual records and indexes. I'm going to scroll up here to this birth index up here. So the New York State Birth Index is not the actual birth registration. It's merely an index. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to show you an index. So this is my Robert Henry here, the 26th of July in Cohoes. This does not give you much information, doesn't give you the parents, doesn't give you anything else. You have to be really careful. You could then order this certificate from the health department in New York State. They're about 2 years behind at the moment, so you'll probably not get it for a couple of years. I happen to have his birth registration, so I have the original copy, but this is the number that you would need to quote if you wanted to get the original if you didn't already have it. Some places are very good at getting, if you order records, you get them fairly quickly. Other places, they're not as quick. So we're going to go back and look at the some of the other things on this page. So that's a lot of the searching stuff that you might want to look at. I will do one other search right now so I don't forget to do it. Family trees. A lot of people post family trees on Ancestry, which can be wonderful. And they can be very useful and very helpful. But they can also be a source of not very well researched information. So I'm going to put in my grandmother, so Robert Vincent's wife. And I know she was born in 1907. I won't put the whole year in. I'll just search with that. And we'll see if it comes up. And it did not, so I have to fix. See, here's an example. I did my search, but I didn't. It came up with too many options because Elizabeth Moore is a very common name. And we'll do that, and we'll search now. Okay, so this was the tree I found earlier. So this is someone's tree that was created on Ancestry. And this picture is actually a picture from my collection. So they have copied my picture onto their tree, which I'm okay with. If I didn't want people to copy it, I wouldn't post it on Ancestry because people copy things all the time. I'm going to show her siblings. Whoops. Second. And that's even wrong anyways, but that's okay. So I'm going to show her siblings. So it lists all of her siblings. This Helen Moore is not right. When I went and looked at, first of all, I knew all my grandmother's sisters and there was no Helen. And when I go and look at the information for Helen, it gives me a baptism in Surrey, BC, in Surrey, England. The family never lived in Surrey. So they've attached this because if I go and view the image, it says her parents were Marianne and George Moore. Marianne and George are very common names. So people have jumped to the conclusion that this Helen Florence, just because the parents' names are Marianne and George and their last name's Moore, that they must be connected to that particular family. And she's not. The other error that's on here relates to Stuart. So Stuart Moore is a relation of my grandmother. It's really her nephew. He was raised as a sibling, but he's not actually a sibling. He was absorbed into the family. One of the daughters had a child out of wedlock, and the parents raised him as their own. But biologically, he is not a child of George and Mary. So that is something, you know, again, when you're searching, you need to understand that you're going to find skeletons and you're going to find things that other people may find uncomfortable. This is one of the ones in my family that some people still find uncomfortable. Stuart's passed away, as is his mother, but there are still people who are who don't really want to admit some of those kinds of things that happened within families. But if somebody was to just take this tree and copy it without checking the information and verifying everything, they would have copied incorrect information. So you got to be really careful. They are great for other things. Stanley Moore was a child that died in infancy. My grandmother would have been 2 at the time. She didn't even know she had a brother Stanley. But I have proven this to be true. So this is in fact actually correct. Okay. Although he was not on a passenger list. So that's not right because he died when he was like 3 months old. So this passenger list is not correct. So some of the information might be right and some of it may not be. So when you're using the trees, they're great hints, but you need to verify everything that you're doing. I'm gonna go back to the home page, watching my time. Across the top, there's some other things that might be really helpful for you. So the search is where we were searching. And again, you can go to the card catalog directly from here, or you can choose to search just within a certain category. Message boards are things that used to get used a long time ago. I'm going to use someone just so I can give you an example. So you can click in here and you can see if anyone else ever messaged people before we had email and all of that.
Hi, Coral. Are you there? I know you just rejoined, but
Sorry, yeah, sorry,
okay.
my power flickered in my house and everything turned off and I'm like,
Oh, I'm glad you came back.
So I'm like, oh, I gotta get back in. So across, I have to re-log into the Ancestry, which I'm not going to worry about. Across the top, so when I was talking in that message thing, you can see a trail of stuff for that particular thread. So somebody posted an obituary of Jane Harkies and other people commented. So you can follow the thread and trail, which can lead you to different links and such, and more information that other people may have added to that conversation. There's also across the top, there's charts and forms, which will give you pedigree charts, family group sheets, things that can help you keep your record and your research organized. The last column across the top was what's new in Ancestry. What I wanted to sort of briefly talk about there is when you look at a record set, especially on Ancestry, it'll give you the last date that it was updated. So if you looked at it last week and all of a sudden they've added more records, maybe you want to look at it again. A lot of times they'll tell you how many records they've added and they'll tell you what sorts of records they've added. So maybe they've extended the years of coverage. Maybe they've re-indexed it in a better way. So they'll give you some information about how and what was actually updated. So that's why when I mentioned at the beginning to track down when you searched a website, that's why it's kind of important because they can certainly, like I said, add more information as they go. The other thing you want to keep in mind is vocabulary and words have changed definitions over time. If you read a census record and it lists somebody that their occupation is a stripper and they're living in the southern United States in the early 1900s, they were likely stripping tobacco leaves. So the definition is going to be quite different depending on the area of the world that you're in and the time period. We also had a huge tobacco industry in Ontario over the London Sarnia Way. And again, if the occupation is stripper there, it's likely tobacco and not other things. So you definitely want to keep in mind that sort of thing. The other thing that'll change is causes of death. If you see an old cause of death and it says consumption, we would refer to that as tuberculosis now, not consumption. You may see other occupations that just don't exist anymore. If you see someone is a cooper, they made barrels. They didn't work with copper. They didn't do any of that. So those are some of the things you got to keep in mind. There's lots and lots of resources on the internet that can help you. with finding out and understanding those types of definitions. I think that is all I wanted to say. And everything's not online. So a lot of things are online, but not everything. So again, those local archives and museums are going to be your best friend. Watch the history and the geography of the area. Your family did not work in isolation. If something happened in the community, they're going to have been involved or been affected by it, whether it was a plague, an epidemic, a fire, something like that, some other natural disaster in the area, they're going to be involved in that, and it's going to affect their lives. Be careful be careful when you find things. As I said before with Stuart Moore, my grandmother's brother, who was really her nephew, you never know what you're going to find, and some people may not be happy with the information that you find. So you need to be very cognizant and very aware of releasing information to people, sharing information with people. If you think it might be uncomfortable for them, maybe just keep it to yourself. You can certainly make notes in your research about what you found, but you may not want to publicly say some of the things that you found. If that makes any sense. If anyone has any questions, I went through things pretty quickly. If you get off this call and you still think, oh, I should have asked, I'll give you my email address at work, and I can certainly always point you in the right direction. My email address at work is info@, so that's INFO. In fact, I'll put it in the chat.
Sure, thank you. I thought of a question while you were talking.
info@ogs.on.ca. So there's my email address in the chat. So if you do get off the call and think, oh, I should have asked, then you can certainly send me an email and I can try and point you in the right direction. The OGS does not do research for people specifically. If you need help with your research, we can again point you in the right direction. And there's an association of professional genealogists that you can actually hire people to do research for you if you are unable or unsure of how to do that.
Great. Coral, did you ever contact the person that had made those errors in the tree that was
I have, not this particular one because I just found it today. But I have in the past, and sometimes they're like, oh, thanks for letting me know. And sometimes they're like, no, I'm right. And I just go like, okay, whatever. I don't get myself all stressed out about it. I did my DNA and I contacted a cousin, and she told me, even though we're a DNA match, she told me we weren't related. I know how we're related, but she didn't want to believe me. So I'm like, okay, like at that point, there's nothing really much I can do.
Right, right. Yeah.
So I try, but it's like, whatever. You can't, if people are convinced that that's correct.
Mm-hmm. We had a question.
So much you can do.
Yeah, I understand. We had a question earlier. I'm not sure if he's still here, but and I don't know if you can speak to this, but just, the difference between records in North America and Canada as compared to Europe or other parts of the world.
Records, well, if you're dealing with the UK, a lot of the records are the same. Most places took censuses, obviously maybe not as early or as late, depending on when that particular area of the world got established. There are lots of census records. Australia, UK, Scotland, Ireland has more recent ones. They took censuses, but they destroyed them all. Birth, marriages, and deaths are recorded. Church records are generally, if there's churches in the area, most of them kept records. So a lot of the records set in the methodology that you use in Canada and Ontario, you can use across the world. You just have to really understand how that society was structured and what kinds of records were required and what governmental department would have had them. One challenging area is like Eastern Europe, because of the fact that it changed, like the Ukraine has changed hands several times. It was independent, then it was part of Russia, it was part of the Soviet Union, and it's gone back and forth. Mm-hmm. You have to really, that's when you need a map and a timeline, because you need to know who was in charge of that particular area in that particular time period to figure out where the records might be. Great. So that Poland is another really difficult one, because again, the boundaries and borders and such have changed drastically over time.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Darlene. Is there a digital tree we can access to build our own with pictures and headstones? And I don't.
Ancestry does have, you can, if you create an account with Ancestry, I do believe you can put up a tree for free. You don't need to pay for a subscription. So you can put a digital tree up there, and you can set your privacy settings. You can put whatever pictures and stuff you want on it, like the tree that I showed you that had some errors in it. Family Search also has a global tree. So you can add to the global tree, but anybody can change that information. With Ancestry, they can't. It's strictly your tree and you manage it, and you can have it as tight a privacy setting where nobody can see it. They'll just get names that are the same, but you can't actually see the tree. Or you can set it to public where everybody can see everything that you've posted. There's other companies like Find My Past and My Heritage where you can also post trees. So you can do that. I do have my tree on Ancestry. I do have it private, so people will see the names, and then they can email me or contact me through Ancestry, and I can allow them access to the tree. I do that because I don't want people mucking with things too much. So I just like to control that, and Ancestry will automatically eliminate living people. So it'll just show they'll show their name as living, and it will show no other information about them. So it will automatically cover that privacy, and most of the other sites will do the same thing. So I do have a backup on my personal computer. I have Family Tree Maker, which is the software package that I prefer, and I keep that on my laptop, and then I have my tree on Ancestry as well to give me both sides. Does that answer your question, Darlene? I hope so.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you so much. That gives, that's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information.
And it definitely, I think once people get going, then that's when the questions will come, right?
Exactly. Go around and play with it. Use the search fields, put in information, add stuff, take away stuff, play around with it and see what you find. Just be very mindful that the verify, evaluate.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you very much for having me. It was awesome.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.